From the outside, it might look like just another legal update, but inside the federal system, the move that just happened is shaking the entire timeline of Diddy's case. Because after months of silence, the courts have suddenly accelerated his appeal, pushing it forward faster than anyone expected, faster than most inmates ever experience, and faster than prosecutors were prepared for. And here's the part that's forcing everyone to pay attention. This shift doesn't guarantee freedom, but it does guarantee that Diddy is going to get his answer a lot sooner than he wanted the world to know. His team is celebrating, legal experts are split, and inside Fort Dix, inmates are already whispering that this could change his entire prison strategy or expose it. Before we break down what really pushed the court to fast-track his case, what it means for his sentence, and why this timing could help or destroy his appeal, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any updates, and hit the like button so we can keep digging into the details the headlines leave out. Now let's get into it. When the news first broke, most people assumed it was another routine filing, another motion. Another attempt from Diddy's legal team to gain momentum in a case that has already consumed headlines for months. But the reaction inside legal circles said otherwise. Because the Second Circuit didn't just accept Diddy's request, they accelerated it. A move that almost never happens unless the court believes the clock itself has become part of the case. This wasn't a favor, this wasn't sympathy, and it wasn't a signal that the judges were leaning in his direction. It was a recognition of something far simpler. Diddy's sentence is short enough that a standard appeals timeline would outlast it, and that creates a problem for the system. If an appeal drags on longer than the actual sentence, the entire purpose of appellate review becomes meaningless. So instead of letting this case stretch over years, as federal appeals often do, the court condensed the schedule, forcing every argument, every document, and every rebuttal into a strict, aggressive timeline. Behind the scenes, this change created a shockwave. Prosecutors now have less time to prepare their response. Diddy's lawyers must deliver airtight arguments without delay, and observers watching from the outside can sense the tension rising. Because once a case is accelerated, it stops being about patience. It becomes a countdown to a decision that could either cement Diddy's conviction or open the door to the one thing he's been fighting for since the day he was taken into custody, a second chance. And as that countdown begins, the pressure around everyone involved is already shifting. When the news first broke, most people assumed it was another routine filing, another motion, another attempt from Diddy's legal team to gain momentum in a case that has already consumed headlines for months. But the reaction inside legal circles said otherwise. Because the Second Circuit didn't just accept Diddy's request, they accelerated it. A move that almost never happens unless the court believes the clock itself has become part of the case. This wasn't a favor, this wasn't sympathy, and it wasn't a signal that the judges were leaning in his direction. It was a recognition of something far simpler. Diddy's sentence is short enough that a standard appeals timeline would outlast it. And that creates a problem for the system. If an appeal drags on longer than the actual sentence, the entire purpose of appellate review becomes meaningless. So instead of letting this case stretch over years, as federal appeals often do, the court condensed the schedule, forcing every argument, every document, and every rebuttal into a strict, aggressive timeline. Behind the scenes, this change created a shockwave. Prosecutors now have less time to prepare their response. Diddy's lawyers must deliver airtight arguments without delay, and observers watching from the outside can sense the tension rising. Because once a case is accelerated, it stops being about patience. It becomes a countdown to a decision that could either cement Diddy's conviction or open the door to the one thing he's been fighting for since the day he was taken into custody, a second chance. And as that countdown begins, the pressure around everyone involved is already shifting. The moment the schedule was approved, legal analysts started paying attention, not because they believed Diddy suddenly had a path to victory, but because of what the timeline revealed about the court's mindset. To understand the move, you have to understand the Second Circuit. This isn't a court that rushes. It doesn't bend for celebrity, pressure, or noise. Its calendar is airtight, and its reputation is built on deliberation, not speed. So why move this case forward? The answer, according to several legal experts, is rooted in procedure, not preference. Diddy's sentence is short compared to typical federal cases, and when an inmate is already serving time, the appeals court is obligated to consider whether a delayed ruling could make the entire process pointless. If he completes his sentence before the appeal is resolved, any victory becomes symbolic instead of meaningful. In other words, the court isn't doing Diddy a favor, they're protecting the integrity of the system. But here's where the tension builds. Expediting the appeal doesn't imply sympathy. It doesn't hint at a possible reversal. It simply ensures the judges can make their decision before the clock runs out. And that decision, whether it lands in Diddy's favor or not, will be final. No retrials, no do-overs, no new maneuvers. This is the moment where everything converges. Years of accusations, weeks of courtroom strategy, and millions spent on attorneys who now have one chance to prove the case was mishandled. But while the judges look strictly at the legal record, Diddy's team sees something else: urgency, pressure, and an opportunity they cannot afford to squander. Because if this appeal fails, his path forward narrows drastically. No more delays, no more legal shields, no more maybe next year. The appellate court becomes the last major battleground, and the window is closing faster than anyone expected. On the surface, Diddy's reaction looks predictable, smiling in the yard, whispering to anyone who will listen that it's happening. But insiders say his excitement isn't about optimism, it's about survival. Behind the scenes, the expedited appeal has become more than a legal milestone, it's his lifeline. People close to the situation claim Diddy has been unraveling privately. The public smile is one thing, the pressure of knowing the system is closing in is another, and inside Fort Dix, the walls talk. Inmates trade information faster than messages travel on the outside, and the whispers about Diddy's future haven't been comforting. According to multiple sources, the appeal timeline offers him something he desperately needs: the illusion of momentum. Even if the odds remain brutally low, having a date, having something concrete is the only thing keeping him from sinking deeper into the reality he can't control. Because here's the truth that his team will never say publicly. The expedited schedule doesn't signify strength, it signifies urgency. Urgency created by a defendant who can't afford to wait. His lawyers know that once he hits the halfway point of his sentence, the appeal becomes less impactful. His opponents believe the clock favors the federal government, and Diddy, he's caught between those forces with only one narrative left to cling to. So yes, he's celebrating, but it's the celebration of a man who's running out of rope, a man hoping that speed might substitute for strategy, a man betting everything on one final window, one that could close just as fast as it opened. And that's where the story starts to shift. Because the closer this appeal gets, the more we begin to see who is truly benefiting from it, and who is quietly cashing out behind the scenes. If you listen closely to the way Diddy's attorneys talk, you'll notice something. They're not speaking like a team convinced of victory. They're speaking like a team racing against a deadline, and that changes everything. Several legal analysts believe the true urgency isn't coming from the court, it's coming from Diddy's own lawyers. Not because they see a legal breakthrough on the horizon, but because they know this appeal is their final, extremely expensive assignment. And the moment the process slows down, questions start forming that Diddy has avoided for months. Where did the money really go? How much did his defense actually achieve? And did every dollar deliver what was promised? Inside circles say the legal invoices haven't just been staggering, they've been explosive. Tens of millions already spent, more to come. And with Diddy's assets under federal microscope, the team is running out of flexibility and patience. Fast-tracking the appeal keeps one thing alive: the perception that progress is happening. Because when a client is desperate, hope becomes currency. And at this stage, hope is the only thing they can continue to sell. But behind the polished statements and press-friendly updates, there's another reality that insiders whisper about. Pressure is building on both sides. The lawyers need movement to justify the money. Diddy needs movement to maintain control of his narrative. And everyone involved knows the window to shape this story is shrinking. This is why the push feels frantic, why the updates feel overly celebratory, why every development is immediately paraded through the media. It's not confidence, it's self-preservation. Because once that appeal hearing is over, the case will be out of their hands. No more filings to hype, no more motions to spin, no more legal milestones to parade as victories. Just the truth of whether the conviction stands. And the closer we get to that moment, the more nervous the people around Diddy have become. Because they know exactly what the court is about to examine, and they know exactly what the odds really are. While Diddy's camp is busy celebrating, the silence from the prosecution has been getting louder. They haven't responded with panic, public statements, or warnings. They haven't pushed back against the expedited schedule. They haven't even raised their voices. And that silence is strategic. Legal experts point out that when prosecutors believe a conviction is vulnerable, they move aggressively. They challenge schedules, file objections, and do everything they can to slow the process. But in Diddy's case, nothing. No urgency, no visible resistance. Why? Because the government knows what Diddy's team refuses to acknowledge. The appeal doesn't re-argue the evidence. It doesn't revisit the testimony. It doesn't reopen the entire case. The appeals court only examines one thing: whether the original trial followed the law. And Judge Aaron ran that courtroom like a machine. No loose ends, no procedural errors, no openings for reversal. That's why the prosecution isn't shaken. They're confident. And their confidence tells us more about the trajectory of this appeal than any headline from Diddy's PR machine. But here's the twist. Prosecutors also understand the optics. They know that objecting to the expedited schedule would paint them as vindictive, petty, or even afraid of scrutiny. By staying silent, they avoid feeding Diddy's narrative and let the clock handle the work for them. Because the faster this appeal moves, the faster it ends. And the faster it ends, the sooner Diddy hits the final stretch of his sentence without any legal shield left to lean on. It's a quiet strategy, but an effective one. And while Diddy's camp is calling this a win, the prosecution's calm response is a reminder that a schedule change isn't a victory. It's simply the path to the final decision, one the government believes will land exactly where they expect it to. Behind the scenes, Diddy's legal team hasn't just been working overtime, they've been scrambling. And this expedited schedule wasn't just a request, it was a necessity. Because according to multiple insiders, the mood inside Diddy's camp has shifted. What started as confidence has slowly turned into pressure, and that pressure has turned into tension. His lawyers reportedly promised a strong path forward, but months inside Fort Dix have changed the energy. Diddy isn't walking the yard with the same swagger he had during the trial. His calls have become shorter, his check-ins more serious, and sources say the frustration is starting to surface. That's why this expedited schedule is so important to them. Not because they expect a full reversal, but because they need momentum. They need something that looks like progress. They need Diddy to believe that the millions he spent weren't wasted. One legal insider said it best: when a high-profile client loses hope, the legal team loses control. And that's the last thing they want. Especially now, when Diddy's inner circle is shrinking. Associates are distancing themselves, business ties are fading, and people who once relied on him financially are watching closely to see whether he still has leverage. This appeal is more than a legal move, it's a lifeline. A lifeline for Diddy's ego, a lifeline for his remaining influence, and a lifeline for the lawyers who know he's their biggest paycheck. But here's where things take a turn. Even though the schedule was approved, the appeal itself remains a steep climb, and experts warn that this boost might simply bring the final answer faster, an answer Diddy may not be prepared for. As one attorney put it, sometimes getting a quicker hearing only means you get your disappointment sooner. And as we move deeper into this story, that's becoming more clear. Because the faster this appeal moves, the faster we reach the moment Diddy's team has been trying to avoid. And what happens when that moment arrives might change everything. On paper, it looks like Diddy scored a victory. An appeal schedule pushed forward, a timeline tightened, a door cracked open. But when you strip away the headlines and the hype, something becomes obvious. The court didn't approve this because they believed his arguments. They approved it because of the clock. Federal appeals for short sentences are often fast-tracked for one simple reason: if the appeal drags on too long, the entire process becomes meaningless. Imagine spending years fighting for a hearing, only to finally get it after you've already finished your sentence. In the government's eyes, that's inefficient. So the court isn't doing this for Diddy. They're doing it to keep the system tidy. Legal analysts mention that when someone has less than 5 years left, judges often push the timeline forward, not to help them, but to clear the docket. The court wants the case reviewed and resolved, while the inmate is still serving time, not after the fact. And that's the part Diddy's PR team won't mention. Because while they're selling this as a sign the judges are taking his claims seriously, the reality is far less glamorous. This is standard procedure disguised as progress. A bureaucratic move, dressed up as a breakthrough. But there's another layer to this, one that's gaining attention among court watchers. Some believe the judges want this off their desks before election season heats up again. High-profile cases can become political distractions, and no one on the panel wants to be pulled into a media circus. So instead of stretching this into late 2026 or early 2027, the court is simply clearing the runway early. But here's the twist. Pushing this forward puts Diddy in a more vulnerable spot. He now has less time to develop new arguments, less time to gather supplemental evidence, less time to craft the kind of legal strategy that could sway a higher court. And with the government's case being airtight, every shortcut in the schedule becomes a disadvantage for the defense. One appeals expert summed it up perfectly. When a court accelerates your timeline, it's not always because they think you're right. Sometimes it's because they're already convinced you're wrong. This expedited schedule didn't give Diddy momentum, it took it away. And as we move into the next part of this story, that missing momentum becomes the most dangerous piece of all. The closer you look at Diddy's appeal, the clearer it becomes. This isn't a battle he's walking into from a position of strength. In fact, legal insiders say he's starting at one of the worst disadvantages a defendant can have, an airtight record from the original trial. Judge Aaron's ruling didn't leave many cracks. Every motion, every objection, every witness issue, every evidentiary challenge, all logged, all addressed, all preserved. Appeals aren't about relitigating the case. They're about pointing to legal errors so significant that they change the outcome. And right now, Diddy's team is struggling to find even one that qualifies. One former federal clerk described it like this: an appeal isn't about emotion, celebrity, or sympathy. It's math. If the numbers don't add up, No amount of personality can change the equation. And that's the wall Diddy is running into. The prosecution didn't overreach. The judge didn't overstep. The evidence wasn't admitted improperly. The jury was screened thoroughly. And every procedural requirement was followed with precision. When an original trial is that clean, an appeal becomes more of a formality than a fight. But here's where things get even more complicated. Because Diddy's team is reportedly attempting to challenge areas that typically don't get overturned. Areas like sentencing decisions and jury interpretation. Those are uphill battles even in low-profile cases. In a case this public with this much documentation, courts tend to avoid second-guessing the process. And then there's the elephant in the room, the public fallout. Appeal judges don't rule based on public opinion, but they're fully aware of how their decisions echo beyond the courtroom. Overturning a conviction with this level of visibility requires overwhelming justification. Right now, that level of justification isn't visible anywhere. A legal expert put it bluntly: expediting an appeal is easy. Winning an appeal is nearly impossible, and that's before considering the biggest issue of all, Diddy's own behavior. Reports have surfaced suggesting he's struggling behind bars, frustrated, anxious, and increasingly desperate. Those emotions aren't just personal, they influence legal decisions in subtle ways. When a defendant appears unstable, erratic, or unpredictable, it rarely inspires confidence in appellate courts. But the most concerning sign for Diddy is this: the same prosecutors who fought him at trial are showing zero fear of the appeal. If they thought there was any chance the conviction might be overturned, they would be preparing aggressively, filing counter-motions, or laying groundwork for potential complications. Instead, silence. And silence from prosecutors usually means one thing: they don't see this as a threat. So while Diddy's team is selling this expedited schedule as momentum, the legal reality is the opposite. The countdown is ticking, the window is closing. And unless something dramatic changes, this appeal is already on life support. If you listen closely to what Diddy's lawyers are saying, and more importantly, what they're not saying, you start to notice a pattern. This rush for an expedited appeal isn't simply about justice or fairness. It's about timing, and timing alone. Diddy's sentence is short by federal standards, and that creates a unique problem. When a defendant is serving 4, 5, or 6 years, the appellate court often has to decide quickly whether the case deserves a second look. Because if they wait too long, the defendant finishes the sentence before the process is complete, and that makes the appeal functionally meaningless. That's the leverage Diddy's team is trying to exploit. They're pushing the narrative that if the courts don't act fast, they're denying him a legitimate chance at review. It's a clever argument, not strong enough to guarantee a victory, but strong enough to pressure the court into setting a fast schedule. But here's the twist: speed helps the defense on paper, yet it hurts him in practice. Because the sooner the appeal is heard, the less time Diddy's team has to rewrite the story, craft new arguments, or hunt for procedural loopholes. Appeals depend heavily on deep research, obscure case law, and long-shot constitutional angles. Compressing the timeline forces his lawyers to choose between rushing or recycling weak arguments. And rushing is dangerous. It means fewer expert consultants, fewer supplemental briefs, less time for forensic reviews, less time to find the kind of rare technical errors that can change outcomes. Legal analysts are already pointing out that every argument Diddy's team has previewed looks thin, not invalid, just thin. The kind of arguments you make when you're trying to sound confident, despite knowing the record doesn't support you. But there's a deeper reason they're pushing for speed, one his PR team won't admit. Diddy is deteriorating behind bars. The bravado on camera doesn't match the quiet reports leaking from inside Fort Dix. Staff say he appears tense, restless, and increasingly isolated. He's trying to socialize, but it's not translating. The old power dynamics don't exist here. Influence has limits. Charm has limits. Wealth has limits. And the appeal, the idea of getting out early, is one of the only things giving him hope. That hope is why he's spending millions he can't guarantee a return on. That hope is why he's leaning on every political connection he has left. That hope is why his lawyers are pushing the timeline to the absolute limit. Because if the court takes its time, as appellate courts often do, Diddy will have already served most of his sentence before a ruling is issued. Even if the judges agreed to overturn something, the effect might be symbolic instead of practical. His lawyers know it, the prosecutors know it, and Diddy knows it most of all. This appeal isn't just a legal fight, it's a race against the clock, and the clock is moving faster than he expected. If the judges shut this down early, his entire strategy collapses. If they delay even slightly, the window closes. And that's why Diddy's legal team is pushing harder than ever before. Because time, not the courts, might be the thing that defeats him first. Here's the part Diddy's supporters refuse to accept. An expedited appeal schedule does not signal confidence from the court. In fact, it often signals the opposite. When an appellate court agrees to move something quickly, it usually means the judges believe the arguments are straightforward, meaning they don't anticipate the kind of complex reversals or lengthy review that might slow things down. Speed isn't a sign of favor, it's a sign that the panel expects this to be a clean procedural process. And clean procedural processes almost always end the same way, with the original conviction intact. Legal commentators who followed similar cases point to the same pattern. When the timeline accelerates, it's usually because the appeal is unlikely to change the underlying verdict. The judges simply don't see enough there to justify extended delays. They'll hear the arguments, review the record, issue a ruling, and move on. But here's the irony. Diddy's team is spinning this like momentum, as if faster somehow means stronger. In reality, speed only benefits them emotionally, not legally. The prosecutors already have their blueprint, their filings are ready, their responses are straightforward, and the trial record speaks for itself. The appeal isn't about retrying the case, it's about whether the judge made a legal error so serious that it changed the outcome. So far, nobody, not even Diddy's own legal analysts, has identified a genuine misstep from Judge Aaron. And that's a problem for the defense, because appellate courts don't overrule based on vibes. They need specificity, they need precision, they need provable mistakes, and "we didn't like the verdict" is not a legal argument. Even worse for Diddy, his team has boxed themselves in. By demanding this accelerated schedule, they gave themselves far less time to build something convincing. They now have to cram months of preparation into a narrow window, all while managing the public meltdown happening around him. The prison issues, the financial fallout, the cultural shift that has effectively cut him out of the industry. Every headline becomes another obstacle. Every leaked story becomes another distraction. Every new witness, lawsuit, or allegation becomes another weight on the case. And the appellate judges see all of it. Because whether people admit it or not, judges live in the real world. They don't operate in a vacuum. The more chaos surrounding a defendant, the less likely the court is to gamble its reputation by reversing a jury or softening a sentence. This is why so many experts believe Diddy is speeding toward the outcome he fears most, not because the court wants to punish him, but because his own legal strategy created a perfect storm he can't outrun. He pushed for speed, and now speed is working against him. The appeal will be heard sooner, but that only means the final answer will arrive faster. And right now, nothing in the record suggests that answer will be the one he wants. For all the noise surrounding the expedited appeal, there's one reality Diddy cannot escape, and it has nothing to do with judges, lawyers, or legal filings. What he fears most is the silence between now and the ruling. That stretch of time where every hour feels heavier than the last, and every day reminds him he no longer controls the narrative. Inside Fort Dix, the world moves slowly. The routine never changes. And for a man whose entire life revolved around momentum, parties, flights, meetings, cameras, the stillness becomes its own kind of pressure. That's where the psychological collapse begins. Not in the courtroom, not in the paperwork, in the quiet. He knows what's coming. He understands the numbers, he sees the odds the same way everyone else does. Appeals rarely overturn anything, and the few that do require airtight evidence, procedural misconduct, or catastrophic legal mistakes. None of that exists in his case. So what Diddy is really fighting isn't the conviction, it's the possibility that this appeal might be his last real swing before the world closes the chapter for good. His team can hype momentum, they can sell progress. They can frame every filing as a breakthrough, but once those prison gates closed behind him, he entered a space where public relations no longer matter. His influence doesn't carry the same weight. His money can't soften the tone of a judge's explanation. His legacy doesn't alter the legal standard the panel must follow. And that is the one thing his inner circle can't protect him from. A courtroom that doesn't care about celebrity, nostalgia, or cultural impact. There's also something deeper gnawing at him. The growing realization that the industry he once dominated no longer sees him as essential. The world moved on quicker than he expected. Artists who once praised him now distance themselves. Executives who once courted his approval now offer silence. And silence, to a man like Diddy, is louder than any public criticism. This appeal isn't just about freedom, it's about identity. If the ruling stands, his future changes forever. His business empire remains fractured. His public reputation slips further into controversy. And the myth of invincibility that he spent decades building evaporates completely. That's why this moment matters so much to him. The appeal isn't just a legal event. It's the last thing tethering him to the version of himself he's terrified of losing. Not the mogul, not the entrepreneur, not the cultural architect. The man who was untouchable, inside Fort Dix. That image is fading. Outside Fort Dix, that image is already gone. And when the appeal is finally heard, whatever decision comes down won't just determine legal status, it will confirm whether the chapter is ending, or whether the story somehow twists one more time. For now, Diddy waits. But waiting may be the hardest part. As Diddy sits inside Fort Dix waiting for the appellate court to decide his future, the world outside continues to shift. His team is pushing every narrative they can, his supporters are clinging to hope, and his lawyers are moving with the urgency of people who know this might be their client's last real opportunity. But here's the truth that cuts through all the noise. Once the appeal lands on the judges' desks, everything becomes mathematical, cold, procedural, unemotional. The panel won't consider fame, cultural impact, or a long career in entertainment. They'll look at the record, the arguments, and the law itself. And when they reach a conclusion, whatever it may be, that decision will define the rest of Diddy's story. Until then, the only thing he can do is wait. And waiting in a place built on repetition and routine becomes its own kind of sentence. Whether this expedited timeline turns into a breakthrough or simply delivers a faster no, the impact will be felt far beyond the walls of Fort Dix. It will ripple through the industry, through his businesses, through his public legacy, and through every ongoing legal battle still hanging over him. And that is where we'll pick things up next time, because this isn't over. Not by a long shot. If you want the real updates, the unfiltered breakdowns, and the pieces everyone else overlooks, make sure you're locked in with us. Like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this appeal changes anything? And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a chapter as this story continues to unfold. This is Fame Insight, where the whispers get loud, the facts stay sharp, and the truth always finds its way to the surface. See you in the next one.